Now to the latest in the murder case involving the singer known as David.
A preliminary hearing is in its fourth day to determine whether there is enough evidence to put him on trial for the teenage girl. The musician, whose full name is David Anthony Burke, is accused of 14-year-old Celeste Hernandez and dismembering her body last year.
The final witness called by prosecutors during the preliminary hearing in the David Anthony Burke case was LAPD Detective Corey Farrell, and his testimony gave the court its most detailed, most personal, and most disturbing look yet at what prosecutors say was happening between David and Celeste Rivera Hernandez behind closed doors. Over the course of his testimony, Farrell read private messages recovered from David's devices and iCloud account that addressed the alleged adult relationship between David and Celeste, a pregnancy that Celeste experienced when she was too young.
Also tonight, a disturbing fake song is spreading online, exploiting the case against jailed singer David. That track appeared on his music page and went viral, with some listeners mistaking it for confession.
Yeah, but reports say the song is fabricated, not actually him. Carlos Aceto joining us live in the news center with more on this. Carlos?
Rick Kareem, the case hasn't even gone to trial yet, but we're already seeing a fake song out and the defendant remains in custody. Tonight, experts say this should have no legal bearing on the ongoing proceedings.
An abortion she underwent in January 2024, the secrecy prosecutors say surrounded every dimension of the relationship, and the communications that prosecutors argue directly support their motive theory for the events of April 23, 2025. The messages Farrell described, stretching from late 2022 through March 2025.
Today, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Rivas Hernandez is testifying.
Burke faces several charges, including murder. He has pleaded not guilty. NBC's Camila Bernal is following this one closely for us. We're also joined by NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Camila, the medical examiner took the stand briefly yesterday, back on the stand today. What are we hearing from him, and who else is expected to testify in this days-long hearing?
Provided the court with a specific, documented, and chronological account of what prosecutors say the private record of this relationship actually looked like. And the picture they painted is one that connects directly to every major element of the formal charges. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. The defense had not yet cross-examined Detective Farrell when court ended for the day, meaning this testimony will face formal challenge. What follows is a factual and analytical account of what Farrell testified to in open court.
Hey, Kate and Ellison. So the medical examiner just got off the stand. They're currently in a lunch break. And I do want to say that some of these details are very graphic because they discussed the state of the body, which had been decomposing. And the medical examiner even saying he couldn't even tell how long that body essentially, or he couldn't tell when she was, because of the state that the body was in. He talked about the dismemberment of the body, the way that the cuts weren't even, essentially saying that he believed that the legs were cut at different times. He also talked about the cause of death, and he says he can't rule out.
Before addressing the messages themselves, Farrell testified that investigators recovered a substantial collection of what prosecutors describe as SA material, commonly referred to as CSAM, from David's devices. According to Farrell, these materials allegedly documented acts involving Celeste when she was a minor and taking place inside David's home. The images were considered too graphic to display publicly in the courtroom. Instead, Farrell described more than 36 such images for the court, including their content and context. One photograph shown in court revealed that the lock screen on David's phone was, at one point, a photograph of him and Celeste together, both unclothed from the waist up. Other photographs shown in court documented a tattoo. Celeste had David's name tattooed in red ink on one of her fingers. That detail carries particular significance because investigators have previously testified that Celeste's left ring finger and pinky finger were found amputated from her remains, and that one of those fingers bore a tattoo of David's name.
A high-profile legal drama takes a bizarre twist outside the courtroom. Singer David's preliminary hearing might be in full swing. However, during the weekend, a falsified track titled "I Did It" appeared on his Apple Music profile. David's page was reportedly hacked, with someone posting a song professing their love for the victim, Celeste Rivas.
The case is definitely drawing a lot of interest internationally and locally as well.
The prosecutors have alleged throughout this case that the amputation was deliberate and intended to make identification of the remains more difficult. During Farrell's description of one of the alleged images, Celeste's mother, Mercedes Martinez, became visibly overcome with emotion and left the courtroom in tears. Her father, Jesus Rivera Hernandez, walked out alongside her. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman approached Mercedes and told her directly, "I really think this is stuff you don't need to hear. I just think it's too much." The departure of Celeste's parents from the courtroom during Farrell's testimony was one of the most emotionally significant moments of the entire preliminary hearing. The chronological scope of the message evidence is itself significant. A communication record stretching from 2022 through March 2025 is not documentation of a brief or incidental contact. It is documentation of a sustained, multi-year relationship conducted through ongoing private digital communication. That span of time directly contradicts the account David gave police during the February 2024 welfare check when he told deputies he had met Celeste only once. Whatever the specific content of any individual message, the documented existence of years of ongoing private communication with a minor when the documented messages began is independently and significantly relevant to the formal charges. The earliest messages shown in the session came from late November 2023, the same period prosecutors alleged the adult relationship between David and Celeste first began.
Celeste Rivas Hernandez being shot. He also talked about the fact that they believe that she was stabbed before she was and so we're getting a little bit more details in terms of what they believe happened. But in cross-examination, the defense then went on to question the Emmy in terms of, do you know for sure who was holding the knife or the instrument, she called it. So essentially, she's implying that maybe Celeste Rivas Hernandez committed suicide or that somehow it was her who herself, which again, that is not what the prosecution believes here. And we are expecting one more detective to take the stand. He's expected to talk about. So we'll see how this all develops.
The messages addressed a pregnancy scare. Celeste wrote that she was afraid she might be pregnant and did not want to deal with her. David's alleged response asked whether she had missed her expected period and told her to begin tracking her menstrual cycle through an app. The conversation between them about missed periods, pregnancy concerns, and cycle tracking was deeply inappropriate between an adult and a minor in any context. In the context of an alleged ongoing adult relationship, it documents a specific dimension of what prosecutors allege was occurring and establishes that David was actively engaged in monitoring the risks associated with that relationship, not unaware of them.
Now that we're seeing that people are trying to hack into his account, who knows what else they're going to be trying to do.
Lou Shapiro is a criminal defense attorney who, like many, has been closely following the hearing as prosecutors present key graphic evidence to take the case to trial.
Yeah, I don't think the defense wants this kind of negative energy. It's been bad enough in the preliminary hearing.
Last week, disturbing images were presented in court of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez's decomposed and dismembered body parts. David, whose real name is David Anthony Burke, covered his face and looked away.
According to Farrell, Celeste underwent an abortion in early January 2024. The messages showed both David and Celeste discussing the abortion in the days leading up to it. Celeste allegedly texted David that neither of them were capable of caring for a young one. David's alleged response included telling her how strong she was and that he loved her, while also mentioning that his mother had advised him to question paternity, to verify whether a young one was actually his if he were ever in that situation. He then allegedly asked Celeste directly, "It is mine, right?"
Camila, thank you. Kristen, let's bring you in here and pick up on kind of where Camila left off there, because ultimately one of the ways the estimated time of was determined in this case was with cell phone activity, right? When you have listened to what the defense has said and some of the positions that they're taking here, what do you expect to have happen next, and what do you think their strategy is going to be?
I think that their strategy really, because keep in mind, all they have to do is poke one hole, create reasonable doubt. And at this level, at the preliminary hearing level, there's no question in my mind that this will go ahead and be sent forward for trial. But what they're trying to do is poke holes both from the public standpoint, because he is a public figure, but then also from...
Celeste confirmed that it was. That detail, David asking whether the child was his, is notable in the context of what the prosecution is presenting. It establishes that David was engaged enough in the situation to raise the question of paternity, while also, according to the messages, receiving guidance from his mother about how to navigate it.
On the stand, LA County Medical Examiner Dr. Grant Ho gave detailed testimony, revealing how the teenage girl had most likely been stabbed twice in the chest and abdomen and cut up, believed, by a chainsaw. Prosecutors also presented dozens of text messages and X-rated sexual images recovered from iCloud data sent between the pair, dating back to August of 2022, when Celeste was just 11, Burke 17. The messages reveal that Celeste had at least one abortion, if not more, during their relationship.
Prosecutors have noted throughout this case that Celeste's connection to David was not entirely concealed from the people around him, and this message adds to the documented picture of what was known and by whom. In the weeks following the abortion, the messages introduced a plan that Farrell described as Operation Awesome, a detailed plan the two had allegedly developed for Celeste to leave home and move in with David. The messages showed David telling Celeste what to pack, confirming he would provide bags, and specifying he was coming to pick her up from Lake Elsinore. On February 13th, David allegedly asked whether he should have his bodyguard bring Celeste out to his car while he waited nearby out of sight. Celeste declined that approach, expressing that it would be embarrassing.
Prosecutors say Burke his girlfriend after she threatened to destroy his career.
So now there is evidence of a sexual relationship between the two of them. She's underage. It can back up the prosecution's theory that she was going to come out publicly with this, and that would tank his career, so therefore it gives him the motive to do what they're saying he did.
Defense lawyers suggest Celeste could have harmed herself with a sharp object.
Now, the preliminary hearing continues tomorrow, where the prosecution is expected to wrap up their case soon. We're live in Hollywood. Carlos Salcedo, KTLA 5 News.
David's alleged reply framed her departure from her family home as one of the most important days of her life, second only to what he described as their future wedding. The detail that David's own bodyguard was being discussed as the logistics coordinator for getting Celeste out of her family home undetected connects directly to the emergence of the live-in bodyguard identified as Sheldon in prior session testimony. If that same bodyguard was allegedly involved in the logistical planning to move Celeste into David's life without her family's knowledge, his potential as a witness in these proceedings becomes even more significant. 2 days after those messages were exchanged, Celeste was reported missing by her family. 14 months later, her remains were found inside the front trunk of David's Tesla. The juxtaposition of those two timelines, the messages about a planned life together, including marriage in Italy and moving in with David, and the subsequent documented reality,
creating doubt in the minds of any potential juror who could be picked. This line of questioning that Camila was talking about outlined some of the vulnerabilities in the case. They don't know what the weapon actually was. That is a huge vulnerability. I do think that there is some reasonable doubt with regard to, well, then who was it that her? But again, I think one of the things that is really scary about this case is the dismemberment. And so because of the cell phone activity, there is a lot of GPS activity as well, electronic data that is going to, I think, fill the holes that will allow the prosecution's case to be strengthened.
Was one of the most significant contextual moments in all of Farrell's testimony. On June 11, 2024, David allegedly wrote to Celeste that he was looking forward to them living together without what he described as interference from law enforcement. He described plans to take her out daily. Only a few hours later, in the same conversation, he discussed wanting to obtain Celeste's personal documents so they could leave the country together and get married in Italy. So within a single day's message exchange, prosecutors say David moved from discussing their planned domestic life to discussing plans to leave the United States entirely with an underage girl. Around that same period, Celeste expressed concern that she might be pregnant again. The message exchange that followed, in which David dismissed her concern and made a dismissive comment about the earlier pregnancy, showed a pattern that appears across multiple exchanges in Farrell's testimony. Celeste expressing something difficult and serious, and David minimizing or deflecting rather than engaging with what she was saying. Prosecutors argue that pattern is documented consistently throughout the message record, and that it provides direct context for understanding the dynamics of the relationship Celeste was navigating in the months before April 23rd. A message from June 2024 also referenced David's mother's apparent awareness of the adult nature of their relationship. David allegedly wrote that his mother understood what him and Celeste would do when they were together.
Kristen, what more have we learned about the relationship between Burke and Celeste Rivas Hernandez since this all started?
A lot of things, and Ellison and I had talked about this on allegedly, one of the things is they didn't have a relationship as we know it from, the colloquial sense. They had an inappropriate interaction that I would say, based on the allegations, that was facilitated by predatory grooming. What we know from the facts is that, he claimed that he didn't know her true age, but the body cam footage from the earlier days in the preliminary.
Establishing once again that the relationship was not entirely hidden from at least one person close to David, while Celeste was still a minor. By August 2024, Celeste's messages had shifted significantly in tone. She began expressing intense grief and guilt about the abortion. In messages Farrell read aloud, Celeste wrote that she had got an abortion for David. She described what happened as taking an innocent life. She said she would have been there for the child if they had continued the pregnancy. She told David she would have to lie about it to people around her for the rest of her life, and that she would do anything to have it back.
Hearing testimony made very clear he knew her age, at least at the point where the police came to his house looking for her. And yet the allegation is that he continued the relationship. And so all of that actually forms the basis of one of the counts that he's actually standing accused of. And that's
Those messages are important not just for what they say about how Celeste was feeling, but for what they reveal about what she understood about herself and her situation. She was describing the abortion in terms of personal loss and moral weight. She was thinking about the long-term implications of keeping a secret that would follow her. She was expressing that she had made a sacrifice she deeply regretted for someone else's benefit. She was carrying that in writing, in private, in messages to the person she held responsible. David's alleged response was to shut the conversation down. He reportedly wrote, "Let's end that here," and told Celeste he did not like talking to her when she was upset. When Celeste asked how David felt about the abortion, he acknowledged sadness, but said what upset him more was that the child had been conceived outside of marriage, before closing the topic by saying, "But I don't dwell on it." That contrast, Celeste expressing ongoing grief and saying she would do anything to undo what had happened, and David deflecting, closing the conversation, and saying he did not dwell on it, is one of the most specific documented examples of the dynamic prosecutors argue existed throughout the relationship. It also provided the clearest illustration yet in Farrell's testimony of why the messages are relevant to the prosecution's formal case. They document not just what allegedly occurred, but how the relationship's emotional weight was carried almost entirely by Celeste, while David managed, deflected, and closed topics when they became uncomfortable for him. The messages continued through the final months of the relationship's documented timeline. By November 2024, the relationship appeared to be repeatedly breaking down and reconvening. David allegedly acknowledged that this was not their first breakup, telling Celeste it was their 8th, suggesting a long pattern of conflict and reconnection rather than a single or simple relationship arc. That detail establishes the relationship as ongoing and sustained rather than isolated or concluded. In a December 2024 exchange, David and Celeste gave conflicting accounts of an adult encounter. David's version cast Celeste as having initiated while also framing himself as the person who had comforted her afterward. Celeste directly contradicted his account, describing a different version of what had occurred. That specific exchange, two people describing the same event in fundamentally different and contradictory ways, with the adult male's version attributing initiation to the minor, illustrates precisely why these messages matter beyond simply documenting the relationship's existence. They document how David is alleged to have framed events within the relationship itself, not just to outsiders or to law enforcement. Farrell testified that the alleged abuse continued until approximately 1 month before prosecutors say Celeste was unalived on April 23, 2025. By March 14, 2025, approximately 6 weeks before April 23rd, Celeste texted David, "We can be friends, but like online. I don't want anything to do with you in person anymore if I'm going to try to move on." That message is one of the most significant in the entire documented timeline. Celeste was not expressing temporary frustration. She was establishing a specific and clear boundary. She wanted to end the in-person relationship and begin moving on with her life. The prosecution's theory is that what followed, the escalating conflict, Celeste's alleged threat to report the relationship to law enforcement, and the events of April 23rd, flows directly from this documented moment of Celeste attempting to create distance and establish independence. Whether the court accepts that theory will depend on the full weight of the evidentiary record, including the cross-examination of Farrell that had not yet occurred when the session ended. But within the message timeline Farrell described, Celeste's March 2025 message represents a documented turning point. A minor attempting to end a relationship with an adult who, according to the prosecution's account of the surrounding messages, had been planning their shared future together just months earlier. Detective Farrell also revealed a significant new detail about the alias network prosecutors alleged David used. In a message from December 2023, David allegedly told Celeste that he used the name Trevion Davis for all of his packages. This is a previously undisclosed alias, distinct from the Victoria Mendez alias that has been referenced throughout the hearing in connection with the post-April 23rd purchases. The December 2023 message places documented alias used within the private communication record between David and Celeste many months before the events that became central to this case. That detail matters for the prosecution's broader argument about pattern and deliberateness. Prosecutors have argued throughout this hearing that the Victoria Mendez alias and the post-April 23rd purchase sequence reflect deliberate planning and concealment rather than impulsive behavior. The December 2023 message establishes that operating under a delivery alias was already a documented practice within David's life at a time when the alleged adult relationship with Celeste was ongoing, and that Celeste herself was aware of it. Farrell also introduced the third chainsaw. Prior testimony had established 2 chainsaws recovered from the garage. This testimony introduced a third, a 10-inch Makita purchased from Home Depot and delivered through Postmates, also ordered around May 1st, 2025. Unlike the 2 chainsaws recovered from the garage, this third saw was never found. Its documented purchase, delivery, and subsequent absence from the physical evidence recovered during the September 17th search adds a specific and unresolved element to the physical evidence picture, particularly given the prosecution's allegations about how Celeste's remains were dismembered. Stepping back, what does Detective Farrell's testimony as the prosecution's final preliminary hearing witness accomplish for the formal case? It provides direct alleged documentary evidence, in David's own words, of the adult relationship with Celeste during the period she was minor. It provides specific documentary evidence of the pregnancy and abortion, events that Celeste was still processing in grief-laden messages many months later. It establishes the alias Trevion Davis as a practice documented within the relationship itself, months before the alleged post-incident purchase sequence. It introduces the unrecovered Makita chainsaw, and it documents Celeste's March 2025 message, establishing a boundary that, in the prosecution's theory, contributed to the escalating conflict leading to April 23rd. But beyond those individual evidentiary contributions, Farrell's testimony accomplishes something the prosecution's prior physical and digital evidence could not. It places the court inside the relationship itself, not the aftermath, not the investigation, the relationship as it was experienced by both parties, documented in their own words over the period from 2022 to 2025. That kind of evidence, direct, first-person contemporaneous documentation of what was actually said and how each person responded, is qualitatively different from the forensic evidence, the purchase records, the location data, and the financial testimony that preceded it. Physical evidence can be contested on chain of custody grounds. Digital records can be challenged on authentication, but messages in which specific people say specific things to each other in specific language, if properly authenticated, carry their own direct evidentiary weight about what those people said, thought, and communicated. The defense will challenge the authentication and context of these messages vigorously. They will argue that specific exchanges should be understood differently than prosecutors have presented them. They will question how the messages were retrieved, preserved, and analyzed. They will note that Farrell's reading of the messages is necessarily selective and that the full context of each exchange may look different than isolated excerpts suggest. All of those are legitimate and predictable challenges that are a normal and appropriate part of the adversarial process, and the cross-examination that follows will test each of those challenges directly. What the court will ultimately evaluate after Farrell's direct testimony and after cross-examination is whether the message evidence, authenticated and presented through the full adversarial process, adds sufficient probable cause to support the formal charges, and whether it connects to the other categories of evidence presented across the hearing in the way prosecutors allege it does. That evaluation is Judge Charlene Olmedo's to make. The preliminary hearing is nearing its conclusion. The prosecution has presented its witnesses and its evidence. The defense's cross-examination of Detective Farrell represents the final major evidentiary development before the probable cause determination. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. Her parents were in that courtroom. Her mother had to leave during testimony about what was allegedly done to her daughter. We will cover the cross-examination of Detective Farrell and every remaining development as soon as confirmed information becomes available through the formal proceedings. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you stay updated. SpillHop. We do not just report the story, we slow it all the way down, go deeper than the headlines, and make sure you actually walk away understanding what is really happening and why it matters. One more dimension of Farrell's testimony deserves explicit acknowledgement: the evidentiary role of Celeste's own voice in this record. Throughout the messages Farrell read into the court record, Celeste Rivera Hernandez spoke for herself about what she was experiencing, what she was afraid of, what she regretted, what she wanted, and what she was trying to move away from. The messages show her expressing fear about pregnancy in November 2023. They show her expressing grief about the abortion in August 2024 in language that was specific, emotional, and clear. They show her establishing a boundary in March 2025, directly telling David she wanted to end the in-person relationship. Those expressions, documented in her own words at each point in the timeline, are part of the formal evidentiary record now. They are not characterizations by investigators or interpretations by prosecutors. They are Celeste's own documented voice speaking about her own experience across the period that ended with her tragedy on April 23, 2025. The prosecution has been building a case around physical evidence, digital records, and forensic findings. Farrell's testimony added to all of that the documented human reality of what Celeste was experiencing and expressing throughout the period this case covers. That dimension of the evidence, Celeste's own words about her own life, is one of the most significant contributions of the final prosecution witness. The cross-examination of Farrell and the judge's probable cause determination will follow. We will cover both.